What if we can positively impact society by reshaping the mindsets of young men? And while we're at it, let me ask you, what does it mean to be a man? My name is Dennis Meralda, a father, a teacher, a coach, a mentor, and a principal with over 2 decades of experience shaping the minds and characters of young men across the United States. If these questions resonate, if you're a young man looking to improve your life or a parent looking for tools to help your son become the best version of himself, the Building Men podcast was created for you. What is up, everyone? Welcome to the Building Men podcast, or welcome back if you have been here before. As always, I'm your host, Dennis Meralda, joined today by a guest that has not been on the podcast in quite some time. We were just catching up, and the last time he was on was August 24th of 2021. The episode was titled Leaning In with Matthew Paetz. I remember when Anthony and I were doing the podcast together at that point. We met Mr. Paetz, and it was a longer episode. We went over almost an hour and a half, and at the end of it, our eyes were like bulging out of our heads. We're like, wow, that was really, really powerful. In the history of Building Men, we're up to episode 217 when this releases. Definitely one of the most powerfully emotional conversations that I've had, and over the course of the next 3 years or so, Matthew and I will get on a phone call or a Zoom every month, 2 months, something like that. And every time that we talk, we are done with the conversation. We're like, we should have been recording that. We got really deep into a specific area. And I will say that over the past several years since I started the Building Men podcast, there's been a couple guests that have like transcended just an acquaintance or a friendship to a level of like a brother, where the conversations that we're having are deep, and someone that I trust and has given me advice, has helped me along my own journey. So Matthew Paetz, welcome back to the Building Men podcast, my man.
Thank you very much, brother. I'm excited.
And I was commenting, your hair looks great, looking good. And for those of you who have not seen Matthew Paetz, go take a look at what he's doing on social media. What's your Instagram handle again? What is
Just my name, so it's
just
at Matthew Paetz. Yeah.
Take a look. Really good looking dude. He's got a chin line that can cut through bread. He's just definitely a good looking dude. One of the best looking dudes we've had on the podcast. So for all the lady listeners out there, go and check out Mr. Paetz. So what have you been up to, man? What's going on in your life since the last time that we talked?
Well,
A lot of stuff.
Now you got me all
You're
flushed
blushing,
and embarrassed.
Right?
My goodness, that is a pretty loaded question.
Yeah.
3 years. I'll tell you what, it's been a lot of reflection and tearing things down. It's interesting, the timing of this conversation we're having today, because I feel as if I am kind of in the the tsunami of a season of transformation. But big things. So, got engaged, launched the business. A lot has shifted recently. Turned 40, which has been a big milestone, but not just in the number, but more of what it represents to me, which has been interesting. Just a lot of growing up, to be honest.
To learn more about our programs, including one-on-one mentorship coaching, the foundation, our Building Men online group community for young men, or to bring a Building Men experience to your school, check out our website, buildingmen.io, or click the links in the bio. Now, back to the show. You mentioned turning 40. And I had a recent conversation with my sister. I have an aunt who her health has significantly declined over the last 2 months or so. So my sister and I, and my mother was actually with us. We just went to visit her in the home where she's living right now, on the verge of hospice. And it was, there's this moment that was very emotional to go. She's having a very, very challenging time communicating. It's pretty much yes and no, the way that she communicates right now. And even then, it's a slowed yes or no when we're talking to her. So we laughed, we shared some old stories, things that we were going through. We cried. We were there for quite some time. And when we left, my sister Tara and I were reflecting on, the stories that we were telling. And I was like, we call her Aunt Sissy. Her name is Adele Crosdale. We call her Aunt Sissy. And I said, when Aunt Sissy and mom were like in our memories, they were like 38, 41, 42
Yeah.
years old. And I'm like, they were so much older than I feel now at 47. I was like, there's no way that we're older than they were in this memory.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if that's just the case. Is that just when, like, kids right now, do they feel like I am as old as the way that I felt that my aunt and my mom were at that age
Yes.
level? They do, right? They do. And I feel like I'm so damn cool for a 47-year-old, but I'm really not. I'm really, really
But
not.
you are.
Well, in my mind, 100%, definitely. So
Yeah.
have when you turned 40, was it a moment for you like, oh wow, I'm 40 years old, or was it like, all right, age ain't nothing but a number, and I'm just living my life, doing the best that I can? Was it a moment for you, or just another day?
No, it was absolutely a moment. And I know everyone has a different relationship to, specific ages. When you turn a new decade, I think it definitely carries some weight, no matter which one that may be. Um, I've now done that 4 times, and every time in hindsight, I can see like a major uh, kind of aha. And yeah, I think it's a time of reflection. I think that's going to be a theme of this. I keep saying that word right
Yeah.
now. But it's important. And it's interesting that you also bring up, that story about your aunt, because the one thing that I didn't mention in, what has occurred in the last 3 years since we last recorded was that we also, lost my mother. And it was a very similar experience, hospice, the whole nine. And excuse me, the that came around about say almost a year before I turned 40. So a lot of the maturing and kind of looking at life through a completely different lens. Um, those two events have been quite significant for me, right? So yeah, for me, just to kind of answer the question a little more cleanly, turning 40 represented becoming a man. And I say that because it's how I uh, associate with that number. I've always had this really, I feel like it's weird, but it's oddly accurate. Um, so I don't know if this is intuition playing out or if this is deep rooted belief, you know, created this, but
Mhm.
either way, it tracks. I've always had this really interesting feeling that no matter what I was going through in life, all the way back when I was a kid, um, that I was going to be okay, because I knew when I turned 40 or got to my 40s, everything was going to like I will have arrived in some fashion. And it's interesting now that I've recently just had my 40th birthday, and I'm looking at my life and I'm like, holy shit, there's a lot of truth to that, and I feel it too. So yeah, it's interesting. I actually love it. There's Maturing has become something that I enjoy.
I've also recognized, while I was mentioning, thinking that the previous generation, my parents' generation, was much older. I also felt like they had it all together more than at times I feel like I have it together. Like, there are
Mhm.
times I'm really winging it as a parent. I'm really winging it as a business owner, really just in life in general. So there's also a moment where I'm like, I feel like more vibrant, energetic, young, youthful, but also at times feel like I'm inside of a hurricane. But I understand what you're saying. When you get to that specific age level, it's like you finally made it. When you think about the next decade of your life, right? Like, one thing that I've recognized into my 40s, and now I'm like, I see 50, I'm creeping up on it. It's like turning around looking at me in the rearview mirror. But when I think about the next decade of my life, I'm more intentional with the things that I want to do with my time, ways to give back, uh,
Mhm.
honoring and fostering loving relationships with people. I'm really intentional about that. When you think about your next decade, are there a couple things that you're like, over the next 10 years, these are things that I'm going to knock out of the park?
I love this question. And it's so for anyone that hasn't, heard my story or maybe even listened to the previous episode, if I recall, I know we probably talked a lot about my past and, trauma and that kind of thing. And, I realized recently that, if the last 10 years, so if I look at my 30s, which were crazy, I mean, everything from, drug addiction to being, formerly being an escort to, near suicide, like it was a hell of a ride in those years. And, I spent so much of my 30s unpacking those things and really leaning into, healing my relationship to those experiences, to my choices, to, the times where I was victimized, and really just moving out of that um, kind of the world's against me to being intentional with the world around me. Um, so when I look at so if I think about it, my last 10 years were unpacking all of the things, the stories, the traumas, the struggles, the patterns, all the stuff, the parts of myself that I feel like were unfulfilled or failing. And, the so at this stage, I turned 40, it felt like a rite of passage. Like it almost like just walked over a bridge.
Mhm.
And, what's on this side of the bridge, what I think about, the next 10 years, it's the first time in my life I can honestly say that my focus is um, predominantly on my future, right? Whereas before it's been, so much of my past. And that's been another level of challenge because everything moving forward means that I'm choosing something I've never done before. I'm intentionally breaking patterns. I'm intentionally changing bad habits. I'm intentionally doing these things that many of them were, I believed were a part of like who I was, right? My identity, things I would never be able to shake. Um, and the next 10 years, it's more of like who I have decided that I'm becoming, and showing up to the uncertainties and the challenge and the hurricane,
Yeah.
as you said. I mean, hell, last night I literally, the growth of the business and the challenges, the personal challenges that inevitably creates. I mean, fuck, I was damn near panic attack. Like, why am I doing this shit? Like, what did I do? Should I just pack it all in? Like, I was having that moment. And then, you wake up this morning and you're like, let's fucking get it. Like, it's another day. Let's go.
And we all go through that, as especially if you're in the entrepreneurial world and you have that moment like, what am I doing? I got to go back to safety. I got to swim back to shore.
Yep.
It's interesting when you mentioned the rearview mirror, like looking
Mhm.
backwards and in this time in your life. I'll analogize it to, I have a daughter who's just finishing up her sophomore year in high school. She has her learner's permit to drive a car, and whenever we can, we get behind the wheel together. And I use that as opportunities not only for drivers education but also life
Mhm.
lessons. And it's a great, and as you were speaking, I was thinking about what we do as men as we're learning how to be a man. Is it's almost like driving in a car. Like when she first started driving, she would look at look at what's coming in front of her and then be like, oh my god, there's a car that's right on my ass, and she's staring in the rear view mirror and she's looking at that, but there's dangers up ahead that she's not even seeing. So it's
Yeah.
important to be able to keep your eyes on the road in front of you, and you glance every once in a while at the side view mirrors, make sure nothing's in your blind spot, as we do as human beings. As things are coming up,
Mhm.
spend a little time looking in the rear view mirror, like, okay, let me just remember where I came from, the things that might be creeping up behind me. It could be our traumas, it could be things that have happened to
Mhm.
us in our past, with the idea that we need to be moving forward, understanding all of that. So I was just thinking about, like, that's a life lesson to speak to my daughter about as we're driving a car, but use life as the vehicle to talk to her about the things that she's doing
Mhm.
behind the wheel. One thing that
Yeah.
you mentioned as well was the rite of passages of turning 40. Right? That was a thing
Mhm.
for you. One thing that I'm very interested in is one for young men who are listening and or their parents who are listening. If we are going to develop strong men in the future, there need to be incremental rites of passage. I mentioned
Yeah.
driving a car. Like getting your driver's license, driving a car is a rite of passage. My son just started working at a 40-hour a week job on a construction site, and he's doing some. It's a
Mhm.
rite of passage. He called me this morning. I was out for a morning walk, and he called me. He's like, "Dad," he's like, "I'm working 8-hour days." He's like, "But it's taking me, it's like a half hour, but I'm in traffic, so it's going to take me 50 minutes to get there." And he's like, "It sucks." And I'm like, "Yes, that's a rite of passage as well to understand,
Sure.
like embracing that suck." And then while he's there, he's doing a ton of walking and he's doing a ton of thinking. So I said another rite of passage is being able to spend time in your head alone with yourself.
Mhm.
As you think back on your journey, use the word reflection a couple times. As you think back on your journey, what were a few rites of passages that you went through that you feel are
Mm.
really important that young men experience themselves?
That's a phenomenal question. And ref- so I'm going to sit with it for a second. But the first thing that came up to me when you were talking about rites of passage is what I now believe a rite of passage is, and this is really coming clear in this conversation. If you think about what a rite of passage is, it's less about a milestone to me, and it's more about a excuse me, it's more about an identity shift, right? Like if you think back in, in any culture where there was they have like rites of passage that they go through, right? Culturally, it signifies a shift in identity, right? When you think of, like, I think of like tribal, cultures where they have some sort of significant rite of passage for the boys becoming like teenagers or warriors or what have you, right? And it signifies a change in identity. And what I can tell you is there's no such thing without excruciating pain. And I say excruciating intentionally because it's the shedding of what you believed you were, and that beginning stage of taking on the responsibility that you're now assuming or accepting is that's the heavy lift, right? Um, but what are some rite of passages I think back? Um, tell you what comes to my mind were some of the most difficult moments were rites of passages for me. And what I learned was what I'm capable of. Um, being at an intersection where you have to consciously choose who you're going to be in those moments. Um, I think those are all rites of passage. And one big one, in the recent years was again going through that process of losing my mother. Um, one before that, many years prior, was standing up to my father. That was a huge rite of
Yeah.
passage as I think about it. And in both cases, what what I would say, and I speak on this quite a bit now with clients and friends, and whenever conversations like this come up, if there's any one piece of advice I would give anyone that is facing something that feels extremely difficult, it's to really take some time and think about showing up in a way that you believe you will be proud later, right? Um, so thinking like making the decision based on like your future self, quite literally, like who am I going to be when this is over? What's, in terms of like losing my mother, like that was a very significant one because, it's final, like death is final, and kind of how we experience it in our human form, if you will. But it was that one thing is what drove all of my decisions during that season. And she went through hospice, so it was a long kind of
Right.
it was a grueling experience to witness and be there hand in hand with my mother. But making those, going into that experience with the desire to make decisions that I believed I would be proud of later. Uh, led to, her and I having some very real and conscious conversations while we still had the chance. Right? It allowed me to show up to the things that were the most challenging, whether they were breakdowns within the family or, supporting my mother in a physically, as her body began to decline, like things that I couldn't imagine ever doing. But every single time I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, when I look back on this, will I be proud of the way that I showed up? And I can tell you right now, almost a year and a half since that's happened, since her passing, still to this day, I don't have any woulda, shoulda, coulda.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any regrets. Um, and I genuinely think that's the greatest gift that I gave myself during that time. And I assume my mother as well, right? Because you may look back in hindsight and wish you would have done things differently because now you know better because you went through it. But it's very different when you look back and regret how you did it. Um, and I believe that making decisions based on how you feel, what you think you'll be most proud of, significantly decreases the chances of regret. I heard someone say the other day, I'm regret proofing my future.
Right.
And that's what that feels like for me. So I don't know if that was
Yeah.
answered your question or if it
It,
opened up a bunch more.
it probably opened up more on my end, but as you're talking, I started to go down this rabbit hole in my brain around that rite of passage, right? It is, I mean, it's a pretty morbid one, but having to go through the experience of burying a parent, that
Mhm.
it really is like, because then you step into that role for other family members and or your children if you have children, right? So Jordan Peterson talks about one thing that he tells young men is to be the strongest person at your father's funeral. And when
Ooh.
he said that, I didn't understand, like I didn't quite really understand. The more I started to think about it was, and then I want to definitely segue into the idea of how we process grief as men too, because,
Yeah.
it's almost like saying, well, shove your shit down, in the benefit of other people. And, is that a
Yeah.
positive or a negative thing? But then I started to think about, especially, so father, mother, whoever, like whoever the caretaker is in your family, the mother role, the father role. And for me, like what I started to do with my own family since my father's exit from all of our lives is to assume that role. So it's almost like I had to bury him in a sense in my,
Hmm.
with how I
Yeah.
interact with the family. So I needed to step up and be that person, that father figure role. I had served that to some extent over the course of my life, but even for my mother right now, like having conversations with my mother about her financial future and what she's going to be doing and how she's handling different things in her health, like I realize I need to step into this role. So it's
Yep.
almost like we need to go through that rite of passage. And the other thing that I was thinking about in the rite of passage idea, it's you enter into whatever the thing is, and it needs to be an experience. You need to go through something.
Mm.
And the thing is the journey that you're going on, and you are tested at specific points in that journey. And there are times when you want to say, like, I can't do this. This is not for me,
Yep.
like you were mentioning before. But then on the other side of it, you persevere and you come out with a different identity. Like the
Yeah.
way
You're
that you
not the
think
same.
about yourself, you're changed, you're different. That's what the rite of
Mhm.
passage is. So even an experience with your mother, like you are a changed man as a result of this,
Mhm.
knowing that you were strong enough to deal with this. And that's why I believe, and a quick tangent around technology and phone use with kids, and then we'll bring it back to that idea was, if I'm going to stand up on a soapbox for a second, talking to parents
Yeah.
about, for your kids, when they're constantly connected to technology and phones, and boys, when you think about are the things that the boys love to do, it's like sports, it's point of view shooter games, or fighting games,
Mhm.
and naked women. Like those are
Mhm.
things that get kids going in their
Mhm.
adolescent time frame, and then include men that are in their 40s as well, probably the same type of thing. But usually that's like when we were growing up, it was done as an experiential type thing. And now, if those are not rites of passages for boys, because
even if they are getting that social need met via playing Call of Duty on a 4-player video game, and they have their headsets on and they're doing whatever, and they might have a good time, they're not going to have that memory going back saying, do you remember that one time that we jumped over the thing and we went into that abandoned bus and we got chased by,
Mm.
the junkyard dog, and it was a whole thing. They're not going to be like, oh, do you remember that one time we were playing Fortnite and I saved you in the elevator shaft with the M16? That doesn't exist. Like the two-dimensional experience is not something that they're ever going to recall back, because there wasn't a true experience with an emotion attached to it. So that's not a rite of passage. So boys growing up are void of that rite of passage. Go ahead.
Well, I actually challenge that, because in
Yeah,
their experience, that is a visceral thing. Whereas you and I may be comparing
right.
it to something very different and see the drastic difference. But to them, if that's all they know, that's 100% what they're going to recall. Because to them in that moment, it represented something significant. Right. But I do agree that the online space, obviously there's so much to talk about this, as there should be, but it's a very interesting thing, like, to be in a generation that understands both. Like, when we grew up,
Right.
we grew up without it, right? But now it's completely, in control of our lives, and it's just very interesting to have one foot on each side of that fence. um but the I think the thing that's really important, and you were talking about, like, men in their 40s, like, still playing video games, and naked women and all that kind of stuff. It's interesting because one of the biggest things that has changed for me, and I'm always going to be transparent because that's
That's who
what
you
this
are.
is.
Yeah.
Um, but one of the things that's shifted, I was mentioning earlier about, thought it was a part of my identity, could never live without it, uh, was pornography. And a huge shift in that relationship was in turning 40 and looking at myself as a man. I started to really question, like, who's the kind of man that I respect, right? Like, genuine respect. And I'm not saying pornography or any of that kind of stuff is bad. It's not my position. But me personally, right, when I would engage with those things, it never felt good. It always felt like there was something in it that felt beneath me, that was childish, and it's in the action and the reason for doing it. um and when I think about becoming a man whom I respect, it's that wasn't a part of that identity, right? So I think it's extremely important for young men, people, to you have to understand, at some point in your life, you're going to have to choose the narrative. And I think a lot of, when you look back at our adolescence and teenage years, like, society gives us a narrative. You're a middle schooler, you're a high schooler, you're an athlete, you're whatever, right? You go to college, you do these things. Well, there comes a certain point, and it usually happens um, without us knowing it, right? It usually happens somewhere in our late 20s, going into 30s. We start to really experience life without a narrative that has been given to us, right? At 30, there's an unraveling that often occurs, right? And I think that's a rite of passage as well. Um, but I think what's extremely important to do is do the real hard work of getting clear on who you want to become, not just what you want to achieve, right? Um, because when you get clear on who you want to become, your decisions will begin to fall in line, and then the results become inevitable, right? Too many people are focused on, I want to achieve something specific so that I can feel that, success,
Right.
strength, whatever. Only if that is the motivation, it's not that the pursuit is in vain, but what I guarantee, and I do mean this literally, I guarantee what is going to happen is you're going to achieve the thing, and it's going to be one of the most challenging experiences you ever had. Because if achieving the thing, if you assume that achieving the thing, certain amount of money, marriage, car, blue check mark on social media, whatever the thing might be for you, if you assume that achieving it is what's going to make you something, you are going to be met with a lot of disappointment, right? Because achieving might be exciting, but it's not fulfilling. right? If the achievement is rooted in appearing as if something. But, the narrative that I believe I've chosen is one of, becoming a man whom I respect, and, and figuring out who that is, taking bits and pieces of men like yourself and others who I genuinely look up to and have bonded with over the years. And, kind of piecing together, like, what are the behaviors that when I look at, I respect, right? Versus uh, trying to prove something, if that makes sense.
Does. And there's a lot of old man issues there. We both have them that we've gone through in our
Oh
own
yeah.
journeys, that we were trying to live up to a version and that we think our fathers have for
I'm
us.
facing it right now.
Yeah, it's a deep dive,
Mhm.
especially so when this episode comes out, Father's Day will have just passed.
Mm.
And I recently had a guest on that I had a conversation with that had situation with his father, and I said he's a first-time father. His daughter's 3 years old or 3 months old, so this will be his first
Mm.
Father's Day. And I said, on that day, what is your thought process? Like, are you going to think about this is who I'm going to be as a man, as a father, or are you thinking more about your own father and the shortcomings that he had? And he had to pause and he had to really, really think about, okay, how am I going to be intentional with this day, like with like how what I'm perceiving this day as. The other thing you mentioned too is pornography there, right? And
Mhm.
if you're listening to this episode right now, this episode will come out in late June. Go back to June 14th and listen to the episode I just did with Mark Picard. It's called Let's Talk About Porn. And we spend over an hour diving into pornography, and our own perspectives, our own histories with pornography, and
Mhm.
how Mark is currently dealing with his raising his own children who are 11 years old in the middle of a divorce, and he's coming, to it. And he was a part of an open marriage. So there's a lot
Mm.
there to unpack.
Mhm.
It's a really, really fascinating episode. So if you're listening now, go back and check that one out as well. The other thing I need to mention as well is you were a guest on the Foundation, which is the online group that I do for young men. We meet once every
Mm.
2 weeks or so, and it's about an hour long. And I have kids from all over the country in their teenage years.
Mhm.
The young men are a part of this group, and you came on and were a guest, and you did an exercise with them about identity, and it was really powerful. And you had them really consider what instead of what they want to do with their life, it's like, what is the type of man that they want to be? Like, what are some of those characteristics, and what is that man capable of doing? And it was powerful for the kids to go through that. And it was an exercise that they did. And afterwards, I got 4 or 5 text messages from boys in the group like, that was awesome. I love that dude. So just
Mm.
knowing that you came on, and I appreciate you generously donating an hour of your time to helping that
Mhm.
generation, but it had a profound impact on them. And one of them was my son. He said, Dad, I
Mm.
really, really enjoyed that conversation with Mr. Paetz. It was an awesome time. So I just wanted to publicly thank you for that, because it really,
Yeah.
really made a big difference. So let's jump back into the grief thing really quickly. And then I want to dive into what you're doing right now, because it's exciting, and it's something that I definitely could have benefited from a couple of years ago, even like a couple
You and
months
me
ago.
both.
Right, exactly. But really quickly though, like when you think about grief, right? It's there's not
Yeah.
a true playbook for it. And I remember the masculine role model for grief that I had growing up was a very negative one. So I still remember the first death that I experienced in my life was my father's father, who supposedly was a really good man, and he died when I was in second grade, so I was 7, 8 years old. And I have some memories of him playing with him. He would help me put together things, and he was the guy that would meticulously put the stickers on the aircraft that I was building, things like that. He was that kind of a guy.
Yeah.
And when he passed, my father, told me and my sister that he died. There was no level of emotion. It was just like, Pop-Up's dead. I just want to, you'll never see him again. And
Mm.
when he told us that, like, he didn't hug us or anything like that. And I just remember feeling like, I don't get this emotion that I'm experiencing. Everyone else was sad around me. And then as I was, into my 20s, I started to lose family members on my mother's side frequently, like very large family. And my grandfather died, and my aunt died, my uncle died, my uncle died, my aunt died. It was like every year there was something in the family. And what my father would do when my mom was experiencing a level of sadness, of emotion, of being overwhelmed, my father would get mad at her and he would pick fights with her. And because he didn't himself know how to deal with the emotion. So I
Too
saw
uncomfortable.
very uncomfortable and he couldn't sit with, I'm just going to be here and hold you. And so when
Yeah.
you think about being the strongest person, he was the antithesis of that. He was a very negative force. And I just remember it was always sadness. And then there was the anger that he experienced. So I was very confused about it because I'm experiencing my own emotion. And I was the guy at all of these funerals that was giving the obituary and doing the speeches and reading from Matthew, whatever. I was the guy that was doing that. And so I never really was able to connect. How do I help my kids deal with grief? It's something that they will experience in their life. Sometimes, like with your mother, you knew it was on the way. And other times it's like, what just happened? And we just lost someone and I wasn't prepared for it. So if you were going to give a piece of advice to a young man and or their parents, thinking about, is there anything that they can do to prepare for it's just going to be part of life. Like death is a part of life. So is there anything they could do to prepare, or is it more just as you're in it, be willing to share what you're going through and have a support system to talk to?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's no specific playbook on this. Everyone's going to respond a little differently. Um, but as I sit here right now, um, the very first thing that comes to my mind is really about responsibility, right? Because, each dynamic is going to be a little different depending on who it is that you lose. There's going to be some that are more foundational than others. Like again, losing a parent is a very foundational piece. And I think first it's accepting the fact that life is going to be very different, right? I think acceptance is going to be huge. Like I'm watching some people in our family right now who are still really angry at the loss, right? They haven't accepted that it is a reality. And on that note too, really quickly, I find that accepting can be a real challenge for people because the belief is if I accept this, then essentially what I'm saying is that it's okay that it happened, right? And that's where people get really stuck. The same with apologies, right? Forgiveness is what the word I was looking for. If I forgive this person for the thing they did, then essentially what I'm saying is it's okay that they did it. Those are not the same thing. Forgiveness and it being okay are not the same thing, right? Accepting is not the same thing as it being okay. And you know what? I'm going to put this really cleanly. If there is one, and I mean one thing that I would encourage anyone going through something as significant as grief, if you don't do anything else, just don't make it worse. And what I mean by that is be very conscious of how you behave in grief, whether it's anger, right? Sadness, despair, shame, all of it. We have like the example you gave, right? So you said who was the gentleman that couldn't hold the space? We get angry. You said it was.
That was my father.
Okay, that's what I thought you said. Right, like just using that as an example, him getting angry in that time made that situation worse, right? And it makes sense why he did when you understand kind of emotions and emotional development and kind of how we process things. But, although a behavior may be justified, that doesn't make it okay. And, so just not making something worse, I think is probably some of the best life advice anyone could ever get. Because when I look back at my life, long before the grief, like, or the long before the loss of my mother, I should say, when I was met with significant challenges, sometimes those rite of passages, Um, I was making I was making decisions that made the circumstance so much worse, right? By trying to avoid the discomfort. So, not making it worse, I think begins with having a trusted source where you don't have to perform. That's probably one of the most significant things for
Right.
me, even in this moment. Like I mentioned earlier last night, I kind of had, the damn near panic attack around, the growth of the business and the uncertainties and, all the amazing things, but they're also uncertain, right? At least that's how it feels. But having a space where you can share without feeling like you need to put on a front or perform, you just get to literally say it as you feel it, while also knowing you're committed to seeing it through, I think are the two things, right? So having a clear vision of where you're going and a safe place to vent and share when it gets a little too much.
Right. Totally agree with that. And I would add in the it's when you're in that moment, it's also the numbing, right?
Mhm.
I'm going to, smoke weed until I don't, I'm so mellow I don't think about it, or drink myself to oblivion. It's like
Yep.
buffering whatever, and the emotion will still be there, and then you're gonna have a hangover as well. It's
Yep.
still so like that's also me being a bit hypocritical in times like that. I have indulged. I have had a little bit too much to drink as I'm trying to process through the emotion, but I also never felt the safe space, be it with my dad, my ex-wife. Like there wasn't a spot that I can come back to and be like, I need to really, really unload and process through this and talk about the things that I'm going through. I feel like I have that in my life right now.
Mhm.
Not that I'm wishing on any grief in my life, but I feel like I would be able to process through it a lot more effectively than I once was in the past. You mentioned the the panic attack that you were having last night, and you and I have been in constant communication in the last
Yeah.
couple weeks, just about some potential for the future things that we might be able to
Mhm.
support each other with. And so tell us a little bit about what you were having a panic attack about. What is this new business venture that you're talking about?
uh Absolutely. It's so it's something that's evolved over time, and the panic is, again, because I'm being challenged to uh I've accepted the challenge to do something much bigger than myself, right? And that's where a lot of that, like, anxiety and oh shit moments and those kind of things naturally begin to happen quite frequently. But the I've been in the I've been in the coaching space now professionally for the past like 6 or 7 years. And I've been very fortunate that my business has grown or stabilized through relationships, right? So I've never been the one who is actively marketing things or, um, on social media 24/7 and that kind of stuff. But my business has grown by way of relationships. And when I reached a point where I wanted to, grow my business even further, so that I could have the foundation to build the life that I wanted for family and that kind of thing, it naturally brought me into the world of marketing. And I found very quickly that marketing is something that, although I understand like logically, it's not how I like to participate in the world. Um, but I also have this huge vision and opportunity to grow something significant that could change, the course of my family, being my business, right? So I had to figure out, and I'm obsessive over this, like figuring out a business strategy that aligns with my strengths and the way that I want to live my life versus just aligning with a strategy that is effective and, produces a lot of, vanity metrics or whatever the case might be. And what that came down to was, uh, I realized that what I love most is to be in deep conversation. intentional conversation with people whom I respect, with people who inspire me, challenge me. And the ways in which I've been able to do that were primarily through this medium that we're doing right now. Right? So through podcasting. And podcasting has been a huge, not just benefit, but I mean, it's completely changed the course of my business, which in turn changes the course of my life. And it's because it allows me to align my future goals with my current interest and desires, right? And what those are to build my business through relationships. And podcasting is the one medium that I have found that like it's based solely on relationships, right? And it just so happens to be something that other people can engage with, other people are listening to, which, by the way, and you know, it grows your audience and all the things that we ultimately want to do with our marketing. So, you know, the business that I have created, and it kind of evolved into something that I didn't anticipate, was doing the same thing for others, right? Because I find that many people, especially those that are in the coaching space, you know, the health, wellness, anything transformational, you know, those individuals often struggle immensely with marketing. You know, the feeling of self-promotion, the feeling of, you know, selling a promise, like give them what they, or tell them what they want, give them what they need kind of thing. Like it often really challenges the, you know, the core values of many of those types of individuals. You know, it feels out of integrity. It feels disingenuous. It feels a lot of things, even if it's not, it feels that way. And what I have found is that aligning with individuals like yourself on credible platforms such as this, right, allows someone like myself and like, you know, you and all the other, you know, countless coaches, thought leaders, authors, you know, these types of individuals who genuinely just want to do great work with good people. They don't want to play the social media game. They don't want to do the, you know, what's the latest viral trend? What's the, you know, latest posting strategy on TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, like all these things. It just completely steals so much of what they do this work for in the first place. So, you know, figuring out and cracking the code on how to build your business, i.e. your message, through meaningful and intentional relationships, podcasting is the one thing that does all of those things. And like today, I've got 3 podcasts that I'm doing, right? And every single time I end one of these conversations, I'm fueled. Like it literally lights me up. But if you ask me right now to pull out my phone and record a video for social media, it sucks the life out of me. Like more than I could possibly put into words without going on some, you know, explicit rant. Like I hate social media while simultaneously respecting the hell out of its power. Right. So, you know, learning how to leverage, you know, our time and our craft and the resources around us, such as social media, has been an obsession of mine, because I truly believe that it's about building a business that lives online so that you don't have to. You know, those are the kind of things that really matter to me.
Love that. And I believe you found that sweet spot of experience and passion. You know, that's where the magic happens. And then also, as you were talking, I thought about an activity that I did with a school district in North Jersey. It's towards the end of the school year. In the beginning, what I asked them to do is build a man. Like, all right, split up into groups and like write down, like actually draw it out. What do they look like? Tell me what characteristics they have. And usually there's a lot of that false masculinity. They have to be bigger, faster, stronger, get with the most girls, have the most money.
Something.
Absolutely. So it's very materialistic in nature. It's what can they do to get something from other people? And then over the year, we break down a lot of those preconceived notions and build up another ideal of what masculinity is. And by the end, I can kind of turn it over to them to lead. It's a really magical thing that happens. But at the end of the year, what we do is we get into this conversation about like, okay, what does it mean then? We've gotten to this point. What does it mean? And there's a lot of words around accountability, self-discipline, working as far as like can you do in service of others, to be the protector, provider kind of guy as well. But two things usually stand out in their mind because we actually go through and we rank them. We came up with like 20 different things, which is, it's interesting, and the definition is constantly evolving. But two things that stood out were having a higher purpose. Like, what's your reason for being here on the planet? Like, what is the reason that you get up that really lights you up? And then also in fostering loving relationships. Like, those are the two things that stand out as like, okay, this is what it means. And that's for all people. But it's really cool for the young men to grasp onto those things. Belief that we are here for a higher purpose and believing in that higher purpose and fostering loving relationships. And that's what you're doing as well. With this idea of podcasting, like, you're helping people talk about the thing that they know the most about, the idea of experience and passion meeting together, and then using that, their purpose, to make relationships and to build relationships, and then let other people listen to those conversations. Now it becomes something that is memorialized. So this conversation will live on long after we are gone. Hopefully, God willing, it's later rather than sooner that happens, but this conversation will live on. So in doing that, what does the program look like? So as you're building this up, like, if I'm interested in doing this, how do I go about, like, what is it going to be? Is it meeting with you? How does it look?
Well, I'll start by who it's really for, right? And who I really love to support are people who they're really skilled at what they do. They're great at their craft, whatever the modality is that they have found to be successful in their life. If they're a healer, if they're an artist, if they're a speaker, if they're whatever the modality. But that person struggles with the business stuff. They struggle with the marketing. They struggle with all of those kind of things, right? That's not where they want to be spending their time. Like, that is my ideal person, someone who is highly qualified or highly capable, and just doesn't enjoy the business side of it, right? So for that person, what we really identify first is, what do they ultimately want to be known for? Like, what's their story, right? What is it that they can speak on with such conviction that for their ideal audience, there's no way they don't get something out of it, right? So we help them identify what that core message is, what we call it as your signature conversation. And then from there, we get really clear on the types of shows that would make the most sense for you. So we do the research, we identify credible shows, so you're not just kind of pitching to the wind. And we do that legwork of helping you. There's a whole pitch process that is, authentic, it's organic, it's effective. And our mission is to align you with people who are leaders within your niche, within your industry, that inspire you, that encourage you, that challenge you, so that the conversations are authentic and enriching. And then we teach you, strategies of how to leverage those conversations to really grow your business in a meaningful, authentic, and sustainable way. Right? So there's 1,000 things you can do with, this podcast once it's recorded, right? And there's a few tactics that we really teach so that people can really become professional guests on credible shows, right? And a big piece of this too that really kind of led to these aha moments for me was that, someone who knew that they were really capable of getting their clients results, having done it in my own life, having done it for many, what I struggled with every single time I opened up my phone and went on social media was feeling credible and respected, because trying to grow grassroots on social media wasn't what felt good to me. That's not where I wanted to be. And every time I did it, it always felt like I was begging for attention. I was, begging for credibility and respect. I just wanted to be seen and acknowledged for what I had earned, right? The expertise, the wisdom, the abilities. And I find that so many have a similar experience. So not only is podcasting uh, the strongest medium, and AI proof, by the way, to create lasting and meaningful relationships with other people that you admire and respect and look up to. But it also is the way to create content that can live online, because there's no avoiding the fact that it's necessary. But it doesn't mean you have to show up to social media every single day. But what it does mean is you need to have something that shows up on social media every day. And that's what these conversations can do. And then it's one of the big things is, as a thought leader, as a coach, as a healer, you no longer have to rely on building an audience from scratch in order to create a business that's sustainable, but rather every single time you go on a credible show, you are being introduced to someone else's audiences, right? And that audience is automatically going to see you as a credible source, because why would the host that they respect have you on their show if you weren't? Right. So, for example, your audience, every guest you've ever had on, there is an unconscious relationship they have to that person that, oh, they must be legit at whatever the thing is. Why else would Dennis have them on the show? Right. So automatically, you as the coach, as the facilitator, you increase your credibility, you increase the level of respect that you have in the marketplace every single time you join a show like this that is credible, respected, and has an engaged audience. And then you just so happen to also be able to grow a business in the back end of it.
It's huge. And like I mentioned, it's something I would have definitely benefited from over the course of the last 4 years, going through the trials and tribulations, making every mistake possible as I got the podcast started, which when this releases, it will be almost the 4-year anniversary. It started July 1st of 2020. So yeah, pretty cool. And 200, this will be episode 216. After that many years, consistency is a big part of it. Two things that you mentioned, though, Matthew, that stuck out to me was the first, getting that person in front of the right audience. So either as a guest, getting them in front of the people that they should be speaking to, and or if they're a host, getting the right type of person on their show to add value to the audience that they're building and they're establishing. If you are a guy that I'm having on around, you're going to teach kids do's and don'ts around survival, and that's my pitch to you. You're not going to get me in front of guys that are going to like a My Little Pony convention in Atlantic City. It's not a synonymous audience right there. It's like, so let me try to match you up with the group. And the other piece, which I think separates you from other groups that might do something along these lines, is the story piece. Because it's like one of the guys that is like a white whale for me is the Tony Robbins guy, change your story, change your life. Because a lot of the things that get in our way is the story that we tell ourselves about ourselves. And once we're able to, that's 100%. And so what you offer as well is a chance to work with someone who has expertise. Again, where expertise or your experience meets your passion, you have the ability to help people unpack those stories that they're telling themselves about why they're unable to do this, and they're not a business owner, and they can tell their story on a podcast because of whatever it is. That's the piece that separates you. And so I think it's an exciting opportunity for anyone who's interested. I mean, definitely reach out, and I will vouch for your authenticity as a human being, as a man, as a friend, as just someone who, again, you have helped me. And I like to say that I was probably like a beta test for you along the way as I was going through my own journey.
Massive, are massive in this.
It's been cool because there's been times where I have gone through that. Like, I don't know what I'm doing right here. I can't sign the clients. I can't, whatever. And you were there to help walk me through, like, all right, let's unpack. What are you saying to you about you? Like, what is the identity? Who is the person that you want to be? And then what can they accomplish? So firsthand, I would say that this has 100% from afar worked for me in what I'm doing, growing the podcast, growing my own business. So thank you.
Absolutely. And I appreciate that feedback too, because I'll tell you, one of the things that I've been struggling with is, that intersection of, what it is that I love to do most and what it is I'm learning how to do. right? So what I love to do, my background's in psychology, right? Specifically transformational psychology, because that's been my story, right? I've had to learn how to make these significant changes. And, every single time I've been able to do that, I figured out a way to guide others who are facing something similar, right? And that's what I really love to do, is help people really transform and become someone that they're proud of. Then I discovered that I wanted to also grow a business and be able to transform, my future through and my family's future by way of, creating something sustainable that was on our terms, that, didn't have a ceiling, financially. And, now that I pursued that piece, it's the intersection of being able to help someone genuinely become who they're proud of, using the vehicle of their business to do so. And, you know, what I think is important is too many people out there are really great at what they do, and they're trying to fit it into a strategy that's just not for them.
Mhm.
Even if that strategy is successful for others, it doesn't mean it's the one for you. And for anyone out there that is really, beating their head against the wall trying to figure out the social media thing just because that's not what you do, not what you want to be doing, I can't say this with more conviction. There is another way. And if this is for you, if you'd rather be in deep conversations, like if you're more comfortable in conversations than you are in content, let's
Yep.
have a conversation because there is another way.
100%. Absolutely agree with that. Uh, Before I ask the last question for the
Mhm.
podcast, anything else I just want to make sure that I have an opportunity to close the loop. Anything else with what's the name of this business? How do we find it? If I'm trying to
All that
get in touch
stuff.
with all that stuff.
Yeah. So the name of the agency is Momentum. And the best way to get in touch is we actually have a quiz. And this quiz is going to help you identify or assess, if you will, your credibility score. Right. And what I mean by credibility, it's, really putting all the pieces together to help you really become that credible, trusted, respected source within your industry, because a lot of people have the skill and the ability, they may even have the credentials, but they have yet to break through that ceiling of, a credible authority in their space. So what the quiz does is it deep dives, into helping you assess where we could start in building that credibility for you so that you can finally break through the noise and rise above all the social media grinds and the hacks and all the things, and actually just spend your time doing what you love and getting the attention and the respect that you deserve for it. So start with the quiz. And, again, if this is something that resonates with you, then I'll meet you on the other side of that assessment, where I'll be able to help you kind of fill in the gaps and identify what is the most appropriate strategy for you to accomplish what you actually want.
And so I took the quiz like a couple days ago. You sent it to me, maybe over the
Mhm.
weekend, something like that, where I sat down and I went through, and it takes 3-4 minutes to take the whole
Yeah.
thing. And what it does is it gives you, I think I scored 72% was my credibility score or something along those
Yeah.
lines. And I answered it from my perspective where I sit right now. But then I decided, okay, let me go back and take it again, me 4 years ago. And how would I?
Mm.
And it was like 13% or 50, it was some like a
Oh,
low
wow.
score, because I wanted to see what was the difference in the feedback that you receive. And the feedback that you get is very different between
Yeah.
like how the score pops up. So it was worthwhile just to take that quiz, just to see, it definitely gives you some interesting feedback. And then if you take that and you want to take it into the next level, that's where the conversation happens with you and, all the good stuff that comes along with it. So I will
Absolutely.
vouch for it from that perspective. It was valuable information for me to receive. And I was like, you're like, hey, do you mind taking it? Sure, I'll take it. But then I'm like, wow, this is really informative stuff. So that it gave you
Mm.
immediate feedback, and then it followed up with an email with a link to click to go a little bit deeper into it. So
Yeah.
I found it very, very useful, very worthwhile information. All right, last question that I'm going to ask is, somebody's listening to this episode. Maybe they go back and listen to episode 215. Maybe they go all the way back and listen to our episode that we did on August 24th of 2021. They get a little bit more insight and information, but they press stop right now and they could do only one thing. And by doing this one thing, whatever it is, it can really change the direction their life is heading, and someone presses stop right now, what's one thing that they can do?
Yeah, they're not going to like it. It's take full responsibility. And what I mean by that is no one's come to save you. Life is fucking hard. Your goals are going to require effort. And what I find is that, to become someone you're proud of has nothing to do with perfection. It has everything to do with being capable. Right? You want to prove that you're capable. And the only way that I have been able to increase my abilities financially, emotionally, physically is it starts with taking responsibility. And in order to do that, you have to start by telling the truth. Be honest with yourself. Period.
Love that. It's you hit two of the things I mentioned. There was a list of 20 that I went through, like what is, like how are we going to define a man? We used a man takes radical responsibility, and a man is competent. He can do the stuff. Like here, there are things that he is able to, he's capable. He can do those things. And so of the 20, you nailed two of them in your final definition, which I appreciate. Those of you that are listening, I appreciate you getting to this point in the episode. Go and check out everything that Matthew Paetz is doing. Follow him along on social media. Check out the program, the momentum program that he was talking about. Take the quiz, have a conversation with him. Like we know, life is all about those conversations. If you got any value from this episode, please consider rating it, reviewing it, and more than anything, sharing it with anyone that you think might get value from listening to this conversation. Go one step further than you thought you could go. We'll see you next time on Building Men.